Say Washington, D.C., and most of us think politics. But comedy? Probably not. However, today in Washington, D.C., we have a flourishing comedy community with all of the magical ingredients necessary to create what my friend Haywood calls the Assassin's Academy of Comedy. We're learning the right way to kill on stage. So in 10 years, when you think of D.C., you're going to think of comedy. Hi, my name's Jack Coleman, and I'm one of the founders of Capital Laughs, which is one of the many great comedy organizations we have here in D.C. We produce 8 weekly shows and have been able to put comics on from about 30 different cities. And I've had the ability to perform in about 12 different cities. And I started to notice, and as I talked to comics here in D.C., realized that we had started to notice that our comics with far less experience were better edited, funnier, smarter, were able to turn over jokes way quicker, had a more genuine connection with the audience. We didn't even realize it, but we were creating a bunch of comedy assassins. Our scene is just built differently. The best way I guess I could describe it is that we got practice, a lot of it. We can practice the right way. And there's a culture of discipline and trust, and there's a fair way to get on stage. Now, like a lot of things in comedy, someone more famous has already said it. In this case, it's Mr. Darrell Hammond, who you might know from Saturday Night Live, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld, who you might know from the Bee Movie, and Mr. Steve Martin, who you might know from Father of the Bride Part 2. These great comics have created what I'm going to call the 3 laws of an Assassin's Academy for comedy. And if we know anything here in DC, it's how to exploit laws. So today, I'm going to walk you through these laws, then I'm going to give you a couple examples. But before I do that, I want to clarify what sort of shows we're talking about. We're talking about essentially open mics, but they've gotten to be so good that they're really more than that. Yes, they're free, and yes, we can tell whatever jokes we want, but they're way closer to a comedy club. So first, to be a comedy assassin, you need to be able to practice a lot, and practice the right way. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to open for Mr. Hammond, and he gave me a really good piece of advice. To get funny, you gotta get on stage 200 times a year or more. That's about 4 times a week. Here in DC, we can easily get on stage 10 or more times. And it's not just that we're getting on stage, it's that we're getting on stage in front of an audience that's way smarter than us. DC has more bachelor degrees per capita than any state. And this is where all the people who are running the country work. They have very stressful jobs, and comedy is a respite. So we're not just getting on stage in front of an audience that's present and wants to be there. We're getting on stage in front of a really smart audience that holds us accountable. It's like running with ankle weights. You're getting quicker and you barely notice it. Second, to be a comedy assassin, you need help from your peers. You need a culture of discipline and trust. This law comes from a documentary, Comedian, in which Seinfeld talks about how he envisions comedy like a construction worker. You work hard every day, you come back the next, you don't complain. There's dedication and grit created by the culture. He also told the New York Times that the reason he wears a suit is because he wants the audience to know that he's here and he's not loafing. In DC, we're not gonna put you on stage if it looks like you just came from the gym, okay? Wearing basketball shorts or yoga pants is disrespectful. You wouldn't do that at your office job. It sounds small and simple, but your clothes don't just dictate your attitude, they dictate what the audience thinks of you. I was at a show in another city, and half of the comics on the show were, not ironically, wearing flip-flops, shorts, and a tank top. The audience was completely checked out. Why would they be paying attention? Comics aren't getting helpful and useful feedback out of their jokes. You're wasting your time. Third, to be a comedy assassin, you need a fair system. This law comes from a magnet on my mom's fridge. It's a Steve Martin quote, and it says, "Be so good they can't ignore you," which is really important. But how are you going to get good in a crappy system? Like we already talked about, DC has the best system. And when you do get good, comedy clubs here will put you on. We got one rule. If you're not on the list, it's because you're not funny. That's it. In other cities, it could be because of who you're sleeping with, or because you don't have your own show to trade time with, or politics, or some mean demographic reason. We don't play that here. In DC, there's a clear, fair path to get across the Martin line. Let me give you a couple examples. America is a country that's very diverse and has diverse comedy tastes, but not all jokes are created equal. Some jokes are clever and they work everywhere. Others are shock and dirty jokes, and they're not going to. In DC, you can tell a blue joke. It just has to be funny. In other places, the audience is just completely comics. So, you're encoding failure there, okay? We have a messed up sense of humor, and it makes you want to tell messed up jokes. Occasionally, they might get a good crowd that holds them accountable. But here, we get one every single night. We're not just practicing. We're taking game shots. We're encoding success. But I think the best example, and I think the one that separates us at a base philosophical level, is that we don't have bucket mics. New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, they all have them. A bucket mic is where you drop your name in a bucket and you hope it gets called. It is a terrible way to develop comics. If the host is honest and they do pull names out of the bucket randomly, why would an audience show up and risk seeing a terrible show? But if the host is shady, like I've seen a lot of hosts do, pulling whatever names they want, what sort of fairness and trust does this communicate to your fellow comedian? You've broken all of our famous faux laws in one example. That's not helping you get better. That's not professional. That is encoding failure. So to wrap up, there are many different cities in America that have good comedy scenes and that are going to produce good comics, but not as quickly and not at the density that we can here in DC. It's not just that we practice or that we practice in front of a great crowd every night, or that we have a culture of discipline and trust, or that there's a fair, transparent system to advance. It's that we have all of them in one place at one time. We have the Assassins Academy for Comedy. So in 10 years, when you think of DC, you're gonna think comedy. And I feel so lucky to be here. We're here, we're doing it. My name is Jack Coleman. Thanks for your time.